Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parbrahm, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Om Dhyanamulam Guru Murti, Pujamulam Guru Padam, Mantramulam Guru Vak, Mokshamulam Guru Kripa. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Shalom friends. Today's reading out session, instead of starting from 27 chapter, it will start with the few paragraphs of 26th chapter, because in the last lecture the video abruptly uh, stopped and I couldn't notice that, and although I read those portion of the chapter, but it was not there in the video. So few paragraphs of chapter 26, and then from chapter 26 onwards of the third book on creation, Utpatti Khanda, we will read out. Uh, in chapter 26, Ma Saraswati and Leela were visiting Brahmin couples' residence after their death, and what is happening over there, let us continue. Our prosperity has fled us from us, and we sit here in dumb despair of hope. Our houses have become dark and gloomy as a desert. Here the humble bees are humming in grief upon the scattered flowers in our garden that now sends forth a putrid smell instead of their former fragrance. This is the sibling, or say the children of Brahmin couple after their death. They are saying so. The vines that twined so gaily around the spring trees are dwindling and dying away with their closing and fading flowers. The rivulet, with their loose and low rippling murmur and the light wave-like motion of their liquid bodies on the ground, are running hurriedly in their sorrow to cast themselves into the sea. Despite the disturbance of the nets flying constantly upon them, ponds are as still in their sorrow as men sitting in meditation. Truly, this day, the presence of our parents is adorning that part of the heaven where heavenly singers, kinners, Gandharvas, and Vidyadhars welcome them with their music. Therefore, O Devi, reduce our excessive grief, because the visit of the great never goes for nothing. Hearing these words, Leela gently touched the head of her son with her hand, as the lotus bed leans to touch its offshoots by the star. At her touch, the boy was relieved of all his sorrow and misfortune, just like the summer heat of the mountain is reduced by the showers of the rainy season. All others in the house were as highly gratified at the sight of the goddesses as when a pauper is relieved of his poverty, or the sick are healed by a draught of the nectar. Ram said, "Remove my doubt, sage. Why did not Leela appear in her own form for of Arundhati before her elder son gave sermon?" Vasishtha answered, "You forget, O Ram, and think that Leela had a material body or could assume one at a pleasure. She was in an astral form, her form of pure intellect, and it was with her spiritual hand that she touched the inner spirit of the boy and not his material body. Belief in materialism leads one to think that this unreal earthly frame is real. Just like a boy's belief in ghosts makes him take a shadow for a spirit. But this belief in one's materiality is soon over upon conviction of one's spirituality. Just like the traces of our visions in a dream are removed on the knowledge of their unreality upon waking. Before that, matter is an belief that matter is an empty nothing leads to the knowledge of the spirit. A glass door appears as open space to someone of an irritable temperament. In the same way, matter appears as nothing to the wise. A dream presents the sights of cities, lands, air, and water, where there are no such things in actuality. A dream causes the movement of our limbs for no purpose. As air appears as earth in dreaming, so the non-existent world appears to exist in waking. It is thus that men see and talk of things unseen and unknown in their fits of delirium. Children see ghosts in the air, and a dying man see a forest in it. Others see elephants in clouds, and some see pearls in sunbeams. Those who are panic-struck and deranged in their minds, the half-waking and passengers in vessels, see many appearances like such ghosts and forests and betray what they see by the movements of their body. In this manner, everyone is of the form of whatever he thinks he himself to be. It is only habit that makes him to believe himself as such. He is not so in reality, but Leela had known the truth of the known existence of the world, was conscious of its nothingness, and viewed all things as false conceptions of the mind. Thus, he who sees only Brahma filling the sphere of his consciousness has no room for a son or friend or wife. He who views the whole as filled with the spirit of Brahma, with nothing produced in it, has no room for affection or hatred for anybody in it. The hand that Leela laid on the head of J26, her eldest son, was not lain from her maternal affection for him, but for his edification in intellectual knowledge. Consciousness being awakened, there is all joy attendant upon it. It is more subtle than ether and far purer than vacuum, and leads to the intellectual being above the region of air. All other things are like images in a dream. And now this chapter 26 ends. We will take chapter 27 now. In this chapter, Leela remembers her past lives. Vasishtha is speaking. Then the two ladies disappeared from that place, leaving the Brahmin family in their house in the mountainous village. The family exclaimed, "We are highly favored by the woodland goddesses." Then, forgetting their grief, they returned to their domestic employments. Then the ethereal goddess spoke to the aerial Leela, who stood fixed in the air over the Brahmin's house in a state of mute astonishment. They converse with each other as familiarly as persons having the same thoughts and desires agree with each other in their views and acts, as the dreamers of the same dream hold their mutual correspondence, like Usha and Aniruddha. Their conversation in their immaterial forms was of the same intellectual kind as we are conscious of in our dreams and imaginations. Saraswati said, "Now you have fully known the knowable, and you have become acquainted with whatever is visible and invisible. Such is the essence of Brahma. Say now, what more do you want to know?" Leela said, "Tell me the reason why I was seen by my son, but wasn't seen where the spirit of my departed Lord is reigning over his realm." Saraswati replied, "Because then you were not perfect by your practice of meditation to have your wish fulfilled. Nor had you lost your sense of duality, which prevents perfection. He who hasn't known unity is not entitled to the acts and benefits of faith in the true God, as no one sitting in the sun can enjoy the coolness of shade. You were not practiced to forget your identity as Leela, nor had you learned that it is not your will, but the will of God that is always fulfilled. Later, you become pure desire and wish that your son might see you, whereby he was able to see you. If you should return now to your husband and do the same, you will undoubtedly be successful in your desire. Leela said, I see within the sphere of this dome that the holy Brahman has been my husband before. I also see that after he died, he became a ruler of the earth. In my mind, I see that the spot of the earth, that city and his palace, where I sat as his queen. Within myself, I see my Lord reigning in that place, and I can even see how he died afterwards. I see the glory of the ruler of so many countries on earth, and I also see the perfect frankness of his conduct throughout his life. In the inner sky of my mind, I see the worlds as they were placed in a casket, just like oil is contained within a mustard seed. I see the bright orb of my husband over wandering before me, ever wandering before me. And now I pray you to contrive some way to place me by his side. The goddess replied, tell me, Leela, to which husband should you go? You have had and will have hundreds of them in your past and future lives, and now there are three of them confined in this earth. The nearest of the three is the Brahman here, who is reduced to ashes. The next is the king lying in the state and covered with flowers in the inner apartment. The third is now a reigning king on this earth and has been buffeting in the waves of error in the vast ocean of the world. His intellect is darkened and disordered by the splashing waves of the worldliness. His intelligence is perverted to stupidity. He is converted to a tortoise in the ocean of the world. The management of his very many disordered state affairs has stultified him into a clumsy lout, and he is now fast asleep amidst the turmoil of business. The strong chain of his thought has bound him to think that he is a lord, mighty and accomplished, and that he is happy and can enjoy his estate forever. Now say, O excellent lady, to what husband do you wish to be led, like the fragrance of one forest carried by the breeze to another? Here you are in one place, and they are in others in this vast universe. The states of their lives and manners differ widely from one another. These orbs of light in the heaven, though they appear to be placed so near to us, are situated millions of leagues apart from one another, and they carry the departed souls. All these bodies are as empty as air, though they contain the great mountains, Meru and Mandara in themselves. All bodies are formed by a combination of atoms constantly proceeding from the great intellect, like particles of sunbeams over the universe. The great and stupendous fabric of the world is no more than a quantity of paddy rice weighed in a balance. As the spangled heavens appear like a forest full of brilliant gems, so the world appears to the contemplative mind as full of the glory of God, not composed of earth or other material bodies. In the intelligent soul, it is consciousness alone that shines in the form of world, and not any material body that has ever brought into being. Like waves in a lake rise, like waves in a lake, rise and set and rise again. So the rising and falling days and nights presents these various scenes to our knowledge. Leela said, so it is, O mother of mankind, I come to remember now that my present birth is of a royal kind, neither too pure nor gross in nature. I have descended from Brahma, have undergone 108 births, and after passing various states, I find myself still in existence. I recollect, O goddess, that I was born before in another world, that I was the bride of a demigod, Vidyadhar, and used to wander about as freely as a bee over flowers. Being debased by my lack of moral restraint, I was born in this mortal world and became the mate of the king of the eagle feathered tribe. Having lived in the woods, then I was returned to a woodman's mate, wearing a garment of leaves on my loins. Growing fond of my life, I played wantonly about the forest and was changed into a bulunka plant, delighting the woods with my leafy palms and flowering eyes. This small tree, the holy hermitage, was held sacred by a group of saintly sages. Then, after the woods were burned down by wildfire, I was regenerated in the form of a hermit's child. Here I was taught the formulas of removing the curse of womanhood, and I became a male in the person of the handsome prince of the land of Surashtra, Surat. Here I reigned for 100 years. Then, on account of my misconduct in the government, I was denounced to become a weasel covered with leprosy, living in the lowlands of Delhi. I remember, O goddess, how I became a bullock in Surat, and how for full 8 years I was goaded by thoughtless cowherd children in their merry sport. I have in mind that when I was transformed into a bird, with what difficulty I broke the net that was laid by bird catchers for my destruction. It was in the same manner as we release ourselves from the snares of sinful desires. I remember with pleasure when as a bee I landed lightly on the leaflets of blossoms, sipped the honey of the blooming buds, dined on the pistils, and slept in the cups of lotus flowers. In the form of an antelope, I wandered about in pleasant woodlands and lawns with my exalted and branching horns and beautiful eyes, until I was killed by a hunter's arrow. I have been in the form of a fish, and I was lifted up by the waves of the sea above the surface of the water. I saw how a tortoise was killed by the blow of a club on the neck. I was a tribal Chandal hunter once, wandering by the side of the Chenab river. When tired of roaming, I used to quench my thirst with coconut water. I also became a stork, delighting in lakes with my mate, filling the air with our sweet cries. In another birth, I rambled about in groves of palm and tamara trees, and fixed my eyes with amorous looks and glances upon my lover. Next, I was a fairy apsara with a form as bright as melted gold and features as beautiful as those of the lotus and lily, in which the celestials used to take delight like bees and butterflies. I remember being on earth, having, having decked myself in gold, pearls, rubies, and other gems, and playing with my youthful consorts in pleasure gardens and groves and on hills and mountains. I also remember living long as a tortoise on the borders of a river, and to have been carried away by the waves, sometimes under a tree of vines overhung with clusters of beautiful flowers, sometimes washed by waves into some wild cave. I see how I acted on the part of a goose covered by feathers, swimming on the high, heaving waves on the surface of a lake. Then, seeing a poor gnat hanging on the moving leaf of a cotton tree branch, I became its associate and as contemptible a thing as itself. I became an aquatic crane also, skimming playfully over waters gushing from hills, slightly kissing the crest of waves rising over the rapid torrent. I remember also how I slighted the loves of amorous youths and spun the lesser demigod with the other children on the Gandhamandan and Mandara hills. I remember likewise the pangs of a lovelorn lass as I lay pinning in my bed, strewn with the fragrance of camphor, and how I was decaying like the disk of the waning moon. Thus I passed through many births in the wombs of higher and lower animals and found them all to be full of pain. My soul has run over the waves of the irresistible current of life, like a fleet antelope pacing its speed with the swiftness of the wind. With this, chapter 27 ends. I will take 20 chapter 28 in this Leela's vision in meditation. Described. Ram said, "Tell me, sage, how did the goddess break out the strongholds of their bodies and the prison house of this world and pass through infinite space and survey the scenes beyond its confines?" Vasishtha replied, "Where is the world and where is its support or solidity? They were all situated in the region within the minds of the goddesses. In their minds, they saw the hilly tract where the Brahmin Vasishtha lived and had his desire for royalty. They saw his deserted house, and in their minds they saw the surface of the earth stretching to the seas. In that imaginary spot of the earth, they saw the city of the king and royal palace which he had enjoyed with his wife. They saw how she was born under the name of Leela and how she worshipped the goddess of wisdom Saraswati, by whom she was miraculously conveyed to the delightful region of the sky. It was in the house situated in that hilly village that she saw the world placed within the space of her mind. Having come out of her vision of the world, she found herself sitting in her house, just like one finds himself lying in his own bed after rambling from one dream to another. All that she saw was mere vision and void. There was no world, no earth, no house, and no distance. It was the mind that showed them these images. Just like the mind presents the object of our desire to view. Otherwise, there is neither world nor earth in actuality. The sphere of consciousness is infinite and without any covering. If agitated by the powers of one's intellect, it presents all the objects of nature to his views. Like the sky, when agitated by heat, produces the winds. The sphere of consciousness is uncreated. It is ever calm everywhere. Deluded minds suppose the world to exist. He who understands rightly sees the world is as unsubstantial as air. But whoever is misled by wrong judgment takes it to be like a solid mountain. As a house and city are manifested to us in our dream, so this unreal world is presented as reality to our understanding. It is like the misconception of water in the mirage and the mistake of gold in a bracelet. All this unreality appears as a reality to the mistaken mind. Discoursing in this manner between themselves, the two charming ladies walked out of the house with their graceful steps. Being unseen by the village people, they viewed the mountain standing before them, kissing the vault of heaven and touching the awe of the sun with its lofty peaks. It was decorated with flowers of various colors and covered with a variety of trees of various colors. There were waterfalls gushing with their tremendous roaring on one side and groves resounding with the warbling of birds in another. The clouds were variegated by many colored clusters of flowers sweeping over them, and cranes in stalks sat screeching on the cloud-capped tops of the Gulunka tree. There were robust reeds lining the banks of rivers with their wide stretching stems and roots. Strong winds tossed the tender vines growing out of the rocky caves. Cloud, Clouds from the vault of heaven hung over the tops of trees covered with flowers and shed their pearly drops of rainwater profusely upon them, forming streams below. The banks of the streamlets were continually lapped by waves raised by the winds, playing upon the shaking trees. Branches spread a cooling shade all around. Standing on that spot, the ladies saw the hilly hamlet in the grass like a fragment of heaven had fallen on the ground. There the rippling streams softly glided by, and here the brimming brooks bubbled in the ground. The birds of the air chirped on the sprays, and aquatic fowls flew about the halls of the seashore. There they saw herds of the cattle slowly moving and gazing in the plains, filling the echoing woods with their loud lowing. They saw an open space broken with shady groves and trees and green meadows all about. The cliffs were white with snow, impenetrable by sunbeams. Hilltops were covered with bushy brambles, forming like braids of hair upon their craggy heads. Cascades falling in torrents in the cavities of rocks, scattering their pearly particles afar like the churning of the Milky Ocean by Mandara Mountain. In one breath, it is being told to us that this world doesn't exist, and it is always the consciousness of the Brahma, and it is everything is in the consciousness of the Brahma. And in another breath, again the variety of the trees and mountains and this earth beautiful is described here. So this is very much illusion. The trees in the glams, loaded as they were, with their fruit and flowers, appeared like waiters upon the goddesses, standing to welcome their approach with their rich presents. Shaken by gusts of roaring winds, the forest trees were shedding showers of their honey-sweetened flowers as offerings to the woodland gods and people. The birds that approached fearlessly to drink the water, dropping from the hill, now fled for fear because the water seemed like sleet or the shells and shots of archers. Birds, parched by thirst and wishing to drink the water, dashed by the waves of the rivulet, hovered upon it like stars in the sky. There were rows of crows sitting on the tops of tall palm trees, from whose side children were hiding the remains of their sweetmeat. They saw country lads with garlands of flowers on their heads and garments roaming in the cooling shades of the date, jam, and neem trees. They saw a lean and hungry beggar woman passing by slowly, clad in cloth of flax with garlands of blossoms over her ears. They saw lazy rustics lying in their lonely retreats, talking away from the noisy brutes where they could hardly hear one another. They saw naked beggar children crowding in a compound, curds smeared on their faces and hands, cow dung on their bodies, and holding flowery branches of plants in their hands. On the green river banks, waves shook bushes as if they were a swing, leaving their marks on the sandy shore of the as the waters receded to their back. There was a house full of flies attracted by sweet milk and curd, but children were crying for lack of food. Herdswomen were fretting at seeing their branch bracelets daubed by the cow dung. They were spreading to dry. Men were smiling at seeing the eagerness of women trying the loosened knots of their hair. Crows from the hilltops were alighting to pick up the offerings of holy sages, and the paths around their houses were strewn with sacred kuru and kurunta leaves. Every morning, flowering plants growing in the caves of the hills and around the house covered the ground, heel deep with heaps of flowers. There were brisk-tailed cattle and antelope grazing in one part of the forest, and a tender young deer sleeping on beds of grass under gunja groves. There were young calves lying on their sides, shaking their ears to drive away the flies that fluttering around their faces, milk dripping from the sides of their mouths. Rooms stored honey collected by driving bees from their hives. Gardens were full of flowering asokas. Rooms were painted with red dye. Winds moistened by rain showers had brought the garden of trees to bloom, and yellow kadam buds hung like a canopy over the beds of green grass below. The ketak tree grove was blooming white from having its weeds removed, and the watercourse glided along with its soft murmuring tune. Winds whistled in the windows of caves, and clouds rested on mountain tops. Ponds were brimming of water covered with lotuses like so many moons. A grove of green trees cast its cooling and undivided shade upon the ground, where dewdrops trembled on blades of grass and glistened like twinkling stars in the blue sky. Trees constantly dropped their ripened fruit, dried flowers, and leaves of various sorts, like showers of snow on whitened ground. Some clouds were seen to hang continually over the household compound, like aristocratic girls who never forsake their parents' home. Other clouds hovered over and over the roof of the house, flashing lightning to supply the light. The altar have reverberated to the loud roaring of wind confined in the caves of mountains. The temple there was graced by twittering swallows and parrots that perched upon it from their numerous flights. Soft breezes moved slowly as they passed along, the lawn loaded with fragrance exhaled by sleepy flowers and gently shaking the leaves of trees. There the ladies listened to the prattling and playful parrots and partridges, and here they heard the melodious notes of the copula nightingale calling back to the jarring crows on the branches. Palm and tamara trees were loaded with fruits, and the forest trees were entwined with the vines that waved their leafy palms around them. There were tender, ivy vines clasping the branches on one side, and the fragrance of effervescent candela and cylindra plants exhaled on the other. Tapering palm and tamara trees rose as high as spires, and cooling breeze was blowing amidst the flower plants in the gardens. There were cattle hastening to drink water in troughs, and garden trees hung with loads of green unripe fruit and beautiful flowers. Running streams were hidden under rows of trees by their banks. Stalks of plants were studded with flowers. Gardens were perfumed with the nectar fragrance of kunda flowers, and lakes were redolent with the odor of lotuses, hiding humble bees giddy with liquor in their honey cells. The air was reddened with rose-colored pollen flying from crimson lotuses, as if mocking the redness of Indra's palace in the sky. The scene was enchanted with the gurgling noise of the small rivers running precipitately down from the hills, kund flowers as white as clouds hanging over them, the beauty of the flower gardens around the house, and the musical warbling of songbirds singing joyfully in the air. Boys were sporting on the beds of flowers, and playful maidens were decked with flowery wreaths hanging down to their feet. Everywhere the ground was adorned with sprouting and prickly shrubs and blades of grass. There was a beauty displayed in the clasping of vines about the clumps of leaves. New shooting buds and blossoms covered the trees, and fragments of clouds shrouded the houses below. The ground was decorated by wreaths of icicles, ICICLES, and the flashes of the lightning in the clouds over the houses terrified the women within. There was a sweet fragrance of the blue lotuses and the hoarse lowing of the cattle hurrying to their green grazing ground. Confident deer and does were lying tamely in the yard, and peacocks danced merrily before waterfalls as if they were showers of rainwater. Fragrant breezes were blowing giddily with the flavors of the fragrances they bore. Medicinal plants were lending their lights like lamps at night. Bird nests resounded with ceaseless warbling, and the noise of waterfalls deafened the ears of men on the bank. Pearly dewdrops continually falling on the ground from the leaves of the trees and blades of grass. The gleaming beauty of the ever blooming blossoms above, and the other everlasting charms of mountain hamlets baffle the description of poets. this chapter 28 ends, and I will rest the reading session here itself. I think chapter 29 I will take in the next reading session. Till then, Shivoham, friends. We'll meet tomorrow by the grace of Lord Ram. Shivoham.